The easiest fortune to keep is the one you never choose to steal. The city library always became beautifully quiet after closing time. The last footsteps faded into the evening, sunlight slipped through the tall windows in long golden lines, and the familiar scent of old books wrapped around every shelf like a comforting memory. I had worked there for 6 years, and every night ended the same way. I returned misplaced novels, straightened reading tables, turned off computer monitors, and made one final walk through every aisle before locking the doors. It was an ordinary life, but I had learned long ago that peace was often worth more than excitement. My father used to tell me that a clear conscience was the only treasure nobody could take away. Since his health had declined, those words had become part of every decision I made. That evening seemed no different until I noticed a large black suitcase resting beside a reading chair near the history section. I looked around the empty room, expecting someone to rush back inside claiming they had forgotten it, but the library remained silent. I checked the visitor log, waited another 15 minutes, and made several announcements over the public address system. No one returned. Curious and slightly concerned, I carefully examined the luggage tag. There was no name, no address, nothing that could identify the owner. Library policy required abandoned property to be reported, but something about the unusual weight of the suitcase made me pause. I slowly unlatched the locks, expecting books, documents, or perhaps expensive electronics. Instead, I stared at neatly stacked bundles of $100 bills filling the entire case. My breath caught. I had never seen that much money outside a movie. Every bundle was perfectly organized, secured with bank straps, creating a silent mountain of cash that seemed completely unreal beneath the soft library lights. Later I would learn the amount totaled exactly $1 million, but in that moment I only knew it was more money than I could earn in many lifetimes. My hands trembled for only a second before I quietly closed the suitcase again. Images flashed through my mind. My father's medical bills. The leaking roof above our small house. The old car that barely started every morning. The overdue repairs I kept postponing because every paycheck disappeared before the month ended. For one impossible moment, the suitcase seemed capable of solving every problem I had ever carried. Then another thought arrived just as quickly. None of those bills belonged to me. Neither did the money. I reached for my phone and calmly contacted library security, then notified the local police that valuable property had been found after closing. While waiting for them to arrive, I remained seated beside the suitcase, refusing to leave it unattended. Nearly 30 minutes later, several professionally dressed men entered the library alongside 2 detectives. They did not look frightened. They looked relieved. One of the men quietly thanked the officers before turning toward me with respectful eyes. "Miss Carter," he said after confirming my identity with the librarian on duty, "you have protected something extremely important." I simply nodded. "I only protected what belongs to someone else." He studied my face carefully, almost as though searching for a reason not to believe me. Instead, he found only exhaustion after a long workday. The detectives documented the recovery while the suited men carefully verified every bundle without creating unnecessary attention. Before leaving, the older gentleman reached into his briefcase and placed a sealed envelope on the table beside me. "Our employer would like to express his gratitude," he explained. I gently pushed the envelope back toward him without opening it. "Please thank him," I replied with a quiet smile. "But I did not return the suitcase because I expected a reward. I simply did what any honest person should do." The man looked genuinely surprised. He slowly picked up the envelope again, nodded respectfully, and walked away carrying far more than the suitcase. Somewhere across the city, the owner listened silently as every detail of our conversation was reported, and for the first time in many years, a man who believed everything had a price found himself wondering how someone could look at $1 million and walk away with nothing except her dignity. The following morning I expected life to return to its familiar rhythm. The library doors opened at 9 o'clock, children hurried toward the reading corner, college students filled quiet tables with notebooks, and retirees searched patiently through the newspaper archives. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before, yet I could not stop remembering the mysterious suitcase or the respectful strangers who had taken it away. I convinced myself the entire experience had already become nothing more than an unusual story I would someday tell my father. Across the city, however, someone else had not forgotten. Sebastian Knight stood inside the top-floor executive office of Knight Holdings overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the morning sun while senior advisors waited around a polished conference table. Financial reports, development plans, and investment proposals rested neatly before them, but Sebastian's attention remained fixed on a single security report summarizing the previous evening at the library. His longtime advisor quietly broke the silence. The money was recovered exactly as reported. Nothing was missing. Sebastian nodded once before asking the only question that seemed to matter. What did she do after discovering it? The advisor opened another folder. She contacted library security immediately, notified the police, remained beside the suitcase until everyone arrived, and refused the reward envelope without opening it. Sebastian looked up for the first time that morning. Without opening it? Yes, sir. Another advisor added. She said she only did what any honest person should do. A faint smile appeared on Sebastian's face, surprising everyone in the room. Interesting. The meeting continued, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. Throughout his career, he had watched countless people negotiate, bargain, and compete for wealth. He had learned that large sums of money usually revealed a person's true priorities within moments. Yet Emma Carter had done something he had almost stopped believing was possible. She had walked away. That afternoon, a black luxury sedan stopped quietly outside the library. Sebastian entered alone, dressed in a tailored navy suit that attracted little attention among the busy lunchtime visitors. He slowly wandered through the bookshelves before eventually finding Emma arranging returned novels in the fiction section. She greeted him with the same warm professionalism she showed every visitor. Good afternoon. Can I help you find something? Sebastian smiled politely. I believe you already helped me yesterday. Emma studied his face for a moment before recognition appeared. The suitcase belonged to you. It did. He paused briefly. I came to thank you personally. Emma simply nodded. I am glad everything was returned safely. Sebastian reached into his jacket and carefully placed a certified bank check on the circulation desk. The amount written across the bottom read $1 million. Nearby visitors remained completely unaware of what rested only a few feet away. Please accept this, Sebastian said calmly. You earned it. Emma looked at the check without touching it. Then she gently slid it back toward him. I cannot. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. Most people would not refuse this opportunity. She smiled with quiet confidence. Then perhaps most people and I value different things. He remained silent, waiting for her explanation. If I accepted money for being honest, she continued softly, then honesty would become something I sold instead of something I believed. The words settled into the silence between them. Sebastian had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet no conversation had ever left him searching for an answer the way this one did. Finally, he folded the check, returned it to his pocket, and nodded respectfully. Miss Carter, he said, you have just given me something far more valuable than I expected to find today. As he quietly walked toward the exit, Emma returned to organizing books exactly as she had before he arrived, never realizing that the most powerful man in the room had just become the one whose life was beginning to change. Some people spend their entire lives searching for something money cannot buy without ever realizing they already walked past it. After Sebastian left the library that afternoon, I returned to shelving books exactly as I had every other day. Children gathered for story hour, students searched through research materials, and elderly visitors quietly exchanged recommendations about their favorite novels. Nothing around me seemed different, yet I had the strange feeling that the conversation we had just shared would remain with me far longer than either of us expected. I never imagined it would remain with Sebastian as well. Back inside the executive headquarters of Knight Holdings, the atmosphere moved with perfect efficiency. Advisors presented investment opportunities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Attorneys reviewed contracts. Executives discussed expansion projects across several states. Sebastian listened politely, approved important decisions, and thanked everyone for their work, but his thoughts repeatedly returned to one sentence spoken inside a quiet library. Honesty would become something I sold instead of something I believed. When the meeting finally ended, his longtime advisor entered carrying another report. "Would you like us to investigate Miss Carter further?" Sebastian looked up calmly. "Only publicly available information. Nothing that invades her privacy." The advisor nodded. "Of course, sir." 2 days later the report arrived. It contained no scandals, no hidden wealth, and no remarkable accomplishments that would ever appear in newspapers. Emma Carter lived in a modest home with her father, who required regular medical treatment after a serious heart condition. She worked full-time at the city library and volunteered every Saturday morning teaching children from low-income families how to read with confidence. Her neighbors consistently described her as dependable, generous, and quietly optimistic. She donated books she could barely afford and often stayed after work without additional pay simply because children enjoyed asking her questions about stories. Sebastian slowly closed the folder. "She never mentioned any of this." His advisor replied softly. "People like Miss Carter rarely do." That Saturday morning, curiosity quietly guided Sebastian toward the neighborhood community center where Emma volunteered. Rather than announcing his arrival, he parked several blocks away and walked the remaining distance alone. Through the open classroom door he watched Emma sitting on the floor surrounded by young children holding colorful picture books. She celebrated every correctly pronounced word as though it were a championship victory. One little girl became discouraged after struggling through a difficult page. Emma smiled warmly, moved beside her, and patiently read the paragraph together until the child's nervous expression became confident again. The room immediately filled with applause from the other children. Sebastian remained unnoticed near the hallway, quietly observing something he had almost forgotten existed. Genuine joy created by helping someone else succeed. As the class ended, the children rushed toward their parents carrying borrowed books against their chests like priceless treasures. Emma stayed behind gathering crayons, arranging chairs, and returning every book to its proper shelf before locking the classroom. She never looked toward the hallway where Sebastian stood watching with quiet admiration. On the drive back to headquarters he remained unusually silent. Finally his advisor asked the question everyone had been wondering. "Sir, what are you thinking?" Sebastian looked out the window as Manhattan passed by beneath the afternoon sunlight. "For years I believed generous people existed because they had more than enough." He smiled faintly. "Today I met someone who gives because she believes kindness is never supposed to wait until life becomes easy." His advisor nodded thoughtfully. "What would you like to do?" Sebastian answered without hesitation. "Nothing that changes who she is. Everything that helps her continue becoming exactly who she already chooses to be." Neither man realized that decision would quietly begin changing far more lives than either of them could yet imagine. The quietest miracles are often the ones nobody notices until they have already changed a life. The weeks that followed settled into a familiar rhythm, yet small blessings began appearing so naturally that I never questioned where they came from. The city library received an unexpected educational grant large enough to replace outdated computers, repair damaged reading rooms, and purchase thousands of new books for children. Everyone celebrated the announcement, believing a generous anonymous donor had simply chosen our library from dozens of worthy organizations. My director could barely contain her excitement. "This changes everything," she whispered while looking around the renovated children's section that had existed only on paper a month earlier. I smiled with everyone else, never imagining that someone I had already met had quietly made the impossible become ordinary. Life at home also began improving in ways that felt almost unbelievable. My father's cardiologist called to explain that a newly expanded medical assistance foundation would now cover treatments that had previously been beyond our budget. I thanked the nurse repeatedly, assuming we had simply been fortunate enough to qualify for a new public program. My father smiled gently after ending the call. Sometimes goodness returns when we least expect it, he said. I squeezed his hand without realizing how true those words were becoming. Across Manhattan, Sebastian reviewed reports inside the executive conference room of Knight Holdings. Community investment proposals covered the table, each carefully prepared by his charitable foundation. His advisors waited quietly while he read every page. The library renovation is complete, one executive explained. The medical foundation accepted the additional funding as requested, and the educational literacy program has doubled its weekend enrollment. Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. Excellent. Another advisor looked up from his notes. Would you like the donations connected to Knight Holdings? Sebastian answered immediately. No. The room fell silent. If people believe kindness always arrives with a name attached, he continued, they begin thanking the donor instead of believing in hope. No one argued. They simply wrote down his instructions. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. I welcomed another group of children into our reading program, surprised by how many new families had joined after the recent improvements. Bright shelves overflowed with colorful books, comfortable reading corners replaced worn furniture, and every child seemed eager to explore the library in ways that had once been impossible. During a short break, I noticed a familiar figure standing quietly near the entrance. Sebastian had entered alone, dressed casually in a dark jacket and light blue shirt, holding a simple paper cup of coffee instead of the polished confidence usually associated with powerful executives. He watched the children laughing together with an expression that seemed peaceful rather than proud. I did not expect to see you here, I said as I walked over. He smiled warmly. I was nearby and wondered how your reading program was going. I looked around the newly renovated room with genuine gratitude. Better than ever. It feels as though someone decided this neighborhood deserved another chance. Sebastian followed my gaze across the bright library before answering softly. Perhaps someone simply believed good people should never struggle alone. His words lingered in the quiet space between us. Before I could ask what he meant, a little boy ran toward the bookshelf carrying his very first library card. His excited smile filled the room with laughter, and Sebastian watched the moment with quiet satisfaction. I never noticed the subtle glance exchanged between him and one of the Foundation volunteers standing near the entrance, but the volunteer smiled respectfully before slipping outside, leaving me to wonder why every unexpected blessing in my life seemed to arrive just after our paths crossed once again. The truth has a quiet way of finding us, usually at the exact moment we believe we have finally stopped asking questions. Nearly 2 months had passed since the mysterious improvements began changing both the library and my father's life. Gratitude had slowly replaced confusion, and although I often wondered who stood behind so many anonymous acts of generosity, I eventually accepted that some answers were never meant to be discovered. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed again. My library director hurried toward my desk carrying a neatly sealed invitation embossed with an elegant silver crest. Emma, she said excitedly, Knight Holdings has selected our literacy program as a finalist for a citywide educational partnership. They have invited you to present the program personally. I looked at the invitation in disbelief. Me? She smiled proudly. You created most of the volunteer curriculum. Nobody could represent it better. 2 days later I stepped inside the headquarters of Knight Holdings for the first time. The towering glass building reflected the Manhattan skyline while polished marble floors stretched beneath enormous chandeliers. Every detail spoke of extraordinary success without unnecessary extravagance. A receptionist warmly welcomed me before guiding me toward the executive conference level. As the elevator doors opened, dozens of executives, attorneys, financial advisors, and department directors quietly waited outside an impressive boardroom. I assumed another important meeting was about to begin, so I politely stepped aside to avoid interrupting anyone. Then the entire hallway suddenly became silent. Every executive straightened their posture at the same moment. Conversations immediately stopped. Security personnel respectfully stepped back from the entrance. Curious, I turned toward the far end of the corridor just as Sebastian walked calmly toward the boardroom wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. No one greeted him casually. Every person acknowledged him with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Mr. Knight," several executives said almost simultaneously. "The board is ready, sir," one attorney added. "The foundation directors are waiting for your approval," another advisor reported. Sebastian acknowledged each person with a calm nod before his eyes met mine across the hallway. His expression immediately softened into the same warm smile I remembered from the library. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward me, leaving an entire executive team patiently waiting behind him. "Emma," he said gently, "thank you for coming." I looked from him to the silent board members surrounding us. "You own all of this?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "I have the responsibility of leading it." Before I could respond, the foundation director approached respectfully. "Mr. Knight, the Educational Investment Committee cannot begin until you arrive." My heart suddenly connected every unanswered question I had carried for weeks. The anonymous library grant. My father's medical assistance. The expanded reading program. The foundation volunteers. None of it had been coincidence. I slowly turned back toward Sebastian. "It was you." He remained quiet for a moment before answering honestly. "Only where I believed an opportunity already deserved to exist." I looked around the magnificent headquarters where hundreds of people trusted his decisions every single day, yet the man standing before me seemed far more interested in whether children had enough books than in displaying his influence. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked softly. Sebastian glanced toward the busy city beyond the glass windows. "Because if you had known who I was first, you might never have allowed me to know who you truly were." His words settled gently into the silence between us. For the first time I understood that the powerful businessman everyone respected was also the quiet stranger who had been searching for something no amount of wealth had ever been able to provide, and standing inside the center of his extraordinary world, I realized that the greatest gift he had ever received was not the return of $1 million. It was meeting someone who believed integrity should never come with a price. There comes a moment when money stops being a measure of success and becomes a mirror reflecting everything it could never buy. I stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sebastian's executive office, watching Manhattan stretch toward the horizon while the weight of everything I had just learned slowly settled into my thoughts. The library, my father's medical care, the anonymous foundation, the expanded literacy program. Every unexpected blessing had quietly carried the same invisible signature. I finally turned toward him. "You changed so many lives without asking anyone to know your name." Sebastian smiled gently. "The work matters more than the recognition." I looked at him carefully. "Most people with your influence would want credit." He walked toward the window beside me, his hands resting comfortably in his pockets. "Most people spend years trying to prove how powerful they are. I spent years discovering that power only matters when someone else's life becomes better because of it." His words carried no pride, only quiet certainty earned through experience. We sat together in a private lounge overlooking the city while fresh coffee was served. No executives interrupted us. No assistants hurried through the doors. For the first time since entering Knight Holdings, the atmosphere felt less like the headquarters of a powerful organization and more like two people having an honest conversation. "May I ask you something?" I said softly. Sebastian nodded. "Anything. Why did my decision affect you so deeply?" He remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Because I stopped believing people like you still existed." He looked down at his untouched coffee cup. "Throughout my career I have watched brilliant people, talented people, generous people, and ambitious people. Almost every conversation eventually became about money, influence, or opportunity. I accepted that as normal." His expression softened. "Then you closed the suitcase, returned every dollar, refused a reward worth $1 million, and went back to organizing books as though nothing extraordinary had happened." I smiled faintly. "It never felt extraordinary to me." Sebastian looked directly into my eyes. That is exactly why it changed me. The room fell quiet again. Outside the windows the city moved with its usual energy, unaware that one conversation inside a quiet office was reshaping two lives. You know, Sebastian continued, people often assume someone in my position can solve every problem by writing a larger check? He shook his head gently. Money can repair buildings. It can improve hospitals. It can create scholarships. But it cannot teach integrity. It cannot purchase character. It cannot inspire children to become honest adults. You already possessed everything I could never buy. His honesty left me unexpectedly emotional. I only lived according to what my father taught me. Sebastian smiled warmly. Then your father gave this city a greater gift than he probably realizes. Just then a discreet knock sounded at the door. Sebastian's longtime advisor entered carrying several folders. Sir, the board is ready whenever you are. Sebastian accepted the documents but did not immediately stand. Please give us another 15 minutes. The advisor nodded respectfully before quietly leaving the room. I looked at Sebastian with genuine curiosity. They all wait for you. He smiled. Leadership is not about making people wait. It is about making certain they always know why they are waiting. His answer somehow explained everything I had witnessed since entering Knight Holdings. Before I prepared to leave, Sebastian handed me a single envelope. Seeing my hesitant expression, he smiled reassuringly. It is not money. I slowly opened it. Inside was a proposal inviting me to help design a citywide literacy initiative through the Knight Foundation, with complete freedom to shape every educational program according to my own principles. There was no extravagant salary, no hidden condition, and no expectation that I would change who I was. I looked back at Sebastian with quiet surprise. For the second time since our paths first crossed, he had offered me something priceless, but this time it was not wealth. It was the opportunity to help thousands of children discover the same values that had quietly transformed both of our lives. The strongest partnerships are never built when one person changes for the other. They are built when both people become even more faithful to who they already are. I carried Sebastian's proposal home without giving him an immediate answer. It rested on my kitchen table beside my father's favorite reading glasses while I prepared dinner that evening. My father quietly noticed the envelope but never reached for it. Instead, he waited until we finished eating before asking the question only he could ask. Does the opportunity match your values? I smiled softly. That is exactly what I have been trying to decide. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Then forget who offered it. Forget how large the organization is. Ask yourself one simple question. If the same opportunity came from someone with no money at all, would you still accept it? His words immediately cleared away every distraction. The next morning I returned to Knight Holdings carrying the unopened agreement. Sebastian welcomed me with the same calm smile he always wore, but I noticed he made no assumption about my decision. Thank you for coming, he said warmly. I placed the envelope on the table between us. I have an answer. He nodded patiently. I am listening. I looked directly into his eyes. I cannot accept anything that asks me to become dependent on your success. He remained completely calm. I understand. Before he could continue, I smiled. But I would be honored to work beside you if we remain partners serving the same purpose. For the first time since I had met him, genuine relief appeared across Sebastian's face. That was exactly what I hoped you would say. We spent the rest of the morning reviewing educational plans instead of financial reports. Every proposal centered on children who lacked access to books, struggling schools that needed additional resources, and neighborhood libraries that deserved another chance. Whenever Sebastian suggested a large investment, I asked how it would continue helping people 10 years later. Whenever I proposed a new literacy program, he quietly found practical ways to make it sustainable without compromising its mission. By lunchtime I realized we approached every challenge from different directions while somehow arriving at the same destination. Over the following months our partnership quietly expanded across the city. Volunteers joined reading programs in neighborhoods that had never before received consistent educational support. Small libraries remained open later so working families could visit together after school. Mobile book vans reached communities where children had never owned a single novel. Every project carried the same simple promise: opportunity should never depend upon a family's income. Reporters occasionally tried to interview Sebastian about the growing success of the foundation, but he consistently redirected every conversation toward teachers, librarians, volunteers, and community leaders. During one interview, a journalist asked why he rarely accepted public recognition for the foundation's achievements. Sebastian smiled thoughtfully before answering. Buildings matter. Budgets matter. Investments matter. But none of them change a child's future unless ordinary people choose to care every single day. Watching the interview from the library, I quietly realized how much he had changed since the evening I first returned the suitcase. He no longer measured success by what he controlled but by what others were empowered to accomplish. One afternoon, after visiting another neighborhood reading program together, we paused outside the library where our story had quietly begun. Children laughed inside while parents browsed nearby shelves. Sebastian looked toward the entrance before speaking softly. You refused $1 million because you believed integrity should never have a price. He smiled warmly at me. Now thousands of children will receive opportunities because that belief never changed. I looked around the busy library filled with hopeful faces and understood something beautiful. Neither of us had won that day in the traditional sense. Instead, we had discovered that the greatest victories are the ones shared by people who choose principles before profit, purpose before pride, and service before recognition. The most meaningful monuments are never built to celebrate the people who give. They are built to remind future generations why goodness deserves to survive. Nearly a year after I first discovered the forgotten suitcase inside the library, the dream that had once existed only in quiet conversations finally stood before us in brick, glass, and sunlight. The new community library rose proudly at the center of a neighborhood that had waited decades for a place where every child could learn without worrying about money. Large windows welcomed natural light into colorful reading rooms. Comfortable chairs filled every corner. Music drifted softly through creative learning spaces while parents explored shelves alongside their children. There were classrooms for tutoring, technology centers for students, quiet rooms for seniors, and outdoor gardens where families could read together beneath flowering trees. Every detail reflected one simple belief: knowledge should never belong only to those who could afford it. The opening ceremony remained surprisingly modest despite the scale of the project. Teachers, librarians, volunteers, construction workers, neighborhood families, and hundreds of children gathered together beneath a clear blue sky. There were no oversized banners carrying Sebastian's name, no dramatic speeches celebrating wealth, and no attempt to transform generosity into publicity. Instead, local students performed music, young readers shared their favorite stories, and community volunteers welcomed every visitor with genuine warmth. Standing beside me, Sebastian watched the celebration quietly, his hands folded comfortably as though he preferred being another guest instead of the person responsible for making everything possible. I smiled gently. Most people in your position would have named this place after themselves. Sebastian looked across the courtyard where children laughed while racing toward the entrance. Buildings should honor the people who use them, not the people who paid for them. Before I could answer, the foundation director invited us toward the front entrance. Instead of asking Sebastian to cut the ceremonial ribbon, she surprised everyone by handing the scissors to one of the youngest children enrolled in our literacy program. The little girl looked nervous until I knelt beside her with an encouraging smile. Sebastian quietly stood on her other side, offering the same calm reassurance. Together we helped her cut the ribbon while applause filled the entire courtyard. As families entered the building, I noticed a simple bronze plaque mounted near the front doors. It carried only one sentence: integrity creates opportunities that money never can. There were no individual names beneath the message. No recognition. No titles. Only an idea powerful enough to belong to everyone. Later that afternoon, I walked through the new library greeting excited children exploring endless rows of books. Some curled into reading corners with their first novels. Others gathered around volunteer tutors eager to begin afternoon lessons. Parents smiled with visible relief knowing their children finally had a safe place to dream beyond their circumstances. Sebastian quietly followed several steps behind, never interrupting the joyful moments unfolding naturally around him. Eventually we paused near a large window overlooking the playground where dozens of children laughed beneath the warm autumn sun. "Do you remember the suitcase?" he asked softly. I laughed. "It feels like another lifetime." He nodded thoughtfully. "I once believed losing that money would have been my greatest disappointment." His eyes remained fixed on the children outside. "Now I realize finding the right person was the greatest investment I have ever made." I looked around the beautiful library filled with hope, curiosity, and possibility. Every shelf, every classroom, every smiling child quietly proved that one honest decision had grown into something far greater than either of us could have imagined. The $1 million had eventually found its purpose after all, not because someone accepted it, but because one woman had been willing to walk away from it, allowing integrity to become the foundation upon which thousands of brighter futures would quietly begin. Some stories begin with extraordinary people. Ours began with an ordinary choice that quietly refused to betray an ordinary conscience. 1 year passed, yet every morning I still unlocked the doors of the community library before the first visitors arrived. Children hurried toward their favorite shelves carrying books almost as large as they were. Parents gathered in the reading garden while volunteers prepared classrooms for another full day of lessons. Watching the building come alive never became routine because I remembered exactly how impossible this dream had once seemed. My father often visited in the afternoons, walking slowly through the bright hallways with a peaceful smile that looked healthier than it had in years. Every time he saw another child discover the joy of reading, he gently squeezed my shoulder without saying a word. He did not need to. We both understood that hope had quietly become stronger than fear. Sebastian visited often as well, although very few people recognized the full extent of his influence. To the children he was simply the kind gentleman who remembered everyone's name, listened carefully to every story, and somehow always knew which book might inspire the next great adventure. Watching him sit on the floor surrounded by young readers felt strangely beautiful because nothing about those moments reflected power or wealth. They reflected presence. One afternoon a teenage boy approached me holding a worn library card. He explained that he had spent months studying inside our reading rooms before earning a scholarship to the state university. His eyes filled with gratitude as he thanked everyone who had believed in him. After he walked away, Sebastian remained quietly watching the young man disappear into the crowd. "That is the return on every investment that truly matters," he said softly. I smiled. "You finally found the profit you were searching for." He laughed gently. "No. You helped me discover that I had been measuring success with the wrong numbers." As autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard outside, neighborhood families gathered for our annual literacy celebration. Teachers shared stories of students who had found confidence through reading. Parents described evenings spent together with books instead of worry. Volunteers welcomed new families who had recently moved into the community. No one spoke about $1 million suitcases anymore because the story had grown far beyond a single decision. It had become part of the culture we were building together. Before sunset, I walked outside with Sebastian toward the same quiet bench overlooking the garden where children laughed beneath golden trees. The city moved peacefully around us while warm light settled across the library windows. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had accepted the money?" I asked. Sebastian considered the question before answering. "Perhaps your life would have become easier for a while." He turned toward the families enjoying the evening together. "But none of this would exist." I followed his gaze across the joyful scene and realized he was right. One honest decision had never simply protected a suitcase. It had protected the person I wanted to remain for the rest of my life. Sebastian stood and offered me a warm smile filled with quiet respect rather than obligation. We walked back toward the library entrance where children waved excitedly from the reading room windows. As I waved back, I understood the lesson our journey would always leave behind. Wealth can open doors, influence can build foundations, and opportunity can transform communities, but only integrity has the power to change a single decision into a legacy that continues touching lives long after the money itself has been forgotten. In the end, the greatest fortune either of us ever received was never counted in dollars. It was measured in trust, shared purpose, grateful hearts, and the quiet certainty that doing the right thing will always create a future richer than anyone could ever purchase.